Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Map update video is coming tomorrow, but today we're talking about something a lot more important. The new baseline that defines the current state of war from a really trusted source. Today we're going to talk about the article by General Zaluzhny. I don't ask often for a lot of things personally for myself, but I feel that this video specifically is extremely important. So please put additional effort today for this video specifically to put a like, share of this video. It's really relevant because this week, at the same time when the Time released their article that I was debunking quite effectively, somewhere here the link will appear for you, you can check it out. At the same time, that article was first and foremost improved by our NAFO friends, our own Borg fellow. So thank you so much for that improved cover. But more importantly, The Economist has released an article that is much better and much more concrete to the situation in Ukraine. And the article comes from an interview with General Zaluzhny. Unfortunately, Economist did a little bit of a like a complication. So they released a bunch of sources and articles around this topic. But for you to understand, there was an interview between General Zaluzhny and The Economist. And beyond that, there was also an article written by General Zaluzhny of his assessment of the war released at this time. This is really good because while I did evaluation of why I thought that the summer offensive failed, and in my perspective why it failed, I mostly talked about what are the consequences of this and what are the kind of general outline, rather than going in depth into the reasons on the ground, the military reasons of why the offensive was not performing as well. Thankfully, now we have the best source to ever tackle that issue with General Zaluzhny. So Economist has actually three things listed. If you see this article over here that's named Ukraine Commander-in-Chief on the breakthrough that he needs to beat Russia, this is from the interview with General Zaluzhny. If you see this article over here, the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces on how to win the war, this article is basically a sum up from The Economist of the General Zaluzhny's written article that The Economist have attached to this. Whereas the third material that came around the same time is the article by General Zaluzhny itself. We're going to start by looking in the interview because I think it gets a couple of baseline points that will help us build the perspective of what General Zaluzhny has said. The best part about what General Zaluzhny has been saying is that he said it very in a neutral tone, without any kind of political statements, very professionally, without any kind of desperations. It since has been pulled apart by different medias, putting a twist on it. But what we need to underline is that when General Zaluzhny himself talks about it, he does not put a twist on it. He doesn't say if it's good, if it's bad. He sees what's happening right now as a professional. He sees what's happening right now as a problem that requires solution. As you will see, and we explore these articles that were written, you will see for yourself that General Zaluzhny is absolutely top-notch professional, and he puts to shame a lot of critics and armchair analysts, potentially such as myself. But I mean, I'm not stating that I'm any kind of big analyst. I'm just a guy on the internet that talks about things. So General Zaluzhny starts by explaining that, and obviously the links for all of the articles will be in description, but General Zaluzhny starts by talking about his underestimation of how many losses Russians are willing to incur. He says that 150,000 dead soldiers on the Russian side would put any other army currently on the planet to its knees, and saying that this is not attainable losses. And I think the most important quote from this interview is where he actually puts everyone to shame. He says, if you look at the NATO's textbooks and at the math which we did for months, should have been enough time for us, like 4 months should have been enough times for us to have reached Crimea, to have fought in Crimea, to return from Crimea, and to have gone back in it again. This explains very much everything on a high level. So all of the expectations, all of the estimates that both the experts were making, that were saying on this channel, everything, even the NATO generals themselves, because we will, as we read, we understand that there is also have been a lot of interconnectivity between General Zaluzhny, General Staff, and the NATO forces. What he explains is that all of the calculations, everything that was done, has pointed to the fact that Ukraine has had overwhelming advantage for any kind of calculations of the warfare that were did before this one. This is important. So estimations that Ukrainian offensive would have a breakthrough, would make it through the trenches and so on, was great, and it was on point. But what he also talks about is puts to shame all of the critics that are now saying, oh, it was because of the Soviet tactics. Oh, it was because of these generals were bad. Oh, it was because of the different other issues, especially like the doomers in the pro-Ukrainian community, which I always say to them, you are talking things that maybe you think you know things about, but because you're such a high-level analyst, you understand certain things, you think you understand all of the things, which is not true. And General Zaluzhny here explains really well that even he thought that whatever is going to be there is going to work, because even NATO generals, all the books are saying, yes, this should have worked. The plan was solid. The plan was well calculated. People that say that the plan was bad are just talking out of their asses. That means that they didn't have any idea, and they still have no idea what they're talking about. They're thinking that they do, but they don't. What General Zaluzhny is later on explaining with all of his authority and looking at this, he says that right now we are being in a new type of warfare, a warfare that the world has never seen before. It's a type of warfare that is especially when we're comparing resources that Ukraine has right now, it cannot be defeated by what Ukraine has right now. Some of the commentators and especially journalists have heard Zaluzhny said the term technology, and they just pulled this like, oh, Ukraine just doesn't have technology. However, General Zaluzhny, in the article, if you actually read it, he says that it's actually not one specific technology that Ukraine needs to break this somewhat stalemate. It's an amalgamation of technologies. They need on many levels, like something that will overcome the current situation on the force field. And that's the key point. Not one technology, whilst he does talks about that we need this kind of a new technological breakthrough, he very clearly states that it's not just one technology that we need significant improvements in multiple areas. And we're going to get to those when we're going to talk specifically about the article that General Zaluzhny has been writing. What is very important is Zaluzhny is very thankful to the supporters of Ukraine, to the US, EU, everyone. He says no one is really obliged to give anything to Ukraine, and he's very grateful. But what it beyond that says is that Zaluzhny, he is not crying and weeping about US not supplying certain things, US, EU, whatever. He's not weeping that European Union and everyone else are dragging their feet. This is my job, a commentator. This is a job of you as well, as a viewer, to write to your local representative and to make sure that they keep Ukraine supplied with what it needs. But Zaluzhny doesn't look at it like this. He's a professional. He looks at it as a person that says, I have these resources. How much can I achieve with these resources? So when he were looking at again, we're coming back to the planning of the offensive, when we are looking at these resources, all the calculations, everything else that Zaluzhny was expecting were on the table. The calculations were solid. The plan was solid. He sees the issue in a potential dragging on of the war. Like says that if there is not going to be this new technology and development, then we're going to end up in this trench warfare scenario, which is extremely unpopular. And he gives an assessment, but this is where an asterisk to that assessment is mandatory. What General Zaluzhny is stating here, we need to make sure that Russia in Ukraine, we don't go in this long stalemate type of conflict because it will benefit Russia. What he is assessing is a military assessment, and military assessments are always based on the negative scenarios. Always. This is a mental thing for a military planner. And for us, from the side viewers, we look at this and says, well, Zaluzhny is saying that the long-term conflict is definitely benefiting Russia. No, what he's saying is that in a military aspect, viewing the situation, it will benefit Russia. But the negative assessment is supply of weapons will dry down for Ukraine. Ukraine will have to rely on its forces. Ukraine will try to rely on slower than expected growth of their weapons productions, etc., etc., etc. It's a negative scenario. We always need to take that account whenever a military person is speaking and giving assessment. I will not go in depth into the second article because it basically sums up the actual article that we're going to talk about by the General Zaluzhny. Coming to that article, there are plenty of things to talk about, and it's amazing. It's separated in two parts. The first part is where General Zaluzhny outlines the problems. He very clearly, very professionally outlines what are the current issues that Ukrainian army is having. The Russians, where they're having advantage-ish parity, more like, and how the improvements should be done. He explains in the great excruciating details what areas of Ukraine technological advancements should be focused on and what capabilities Ukraine need to get to break the stalemate. So starting with the first part, General Zaluzhny talks about that Russia is definitely a strong opponent. Ukraine has never been like a top military, even pretended to be a top military. The fact that Ukraine is able to be on a parity with Russia in 1.5 years, magnificent achievements. It's glorious. We never need to underestimate just how far Ukraine has gotten from we need to fight for our survival by handing out a Kalashnikov to every single person in every single city without training, to now being on the same level in both artillery and other areas of warfare with Russia. It's important to recognize, and we should never forget where we stand, and that Russia is still, generally speaking, the initiating force and the aggressive force. He also says that to find a way of the positional form of warfare, it is necessary to gain multiple things, such as air superiority, mine-breaching capabilities in depth, increase the effectiveness of the counter-battery fire, and create and train the necessary reserves together with the electronic warfare. So 5 things General Zaluzhny is focusing that needs to be achieved for Ukraine to achieve a significant breakthrough in this warfare. It should be noted that the above mentioned components are in no way dismissing the underlying requirements for more artillery, missile systems, electronic warfare that Ukraine is already having and the partners are already providing. That's why it's important. Zaluzhny is talking about being better and overcoming current situation. So when we are talking about it's a good test for us. That's a great test for us. When we're talking about whether US wants defeat of Russia or it just wants to not let Ukraine lose, right? That's a frequent question on my channel. Now you have a clear filter. The first filter is if US is just going to send artillery, basic weapons, and so on. That means that there is a very clear path towards US just not letting Ukraine lose. However, if US is going to start providing with additional capabilities that General Zaluzhny is outlining, like providing additional on-scale mine-breaching capabilities, increasing the training facilities, etc., etc., that means that US is aiming for actual win of Ukraine over Russia. So whoever was really asking that question to yourself or to everyone else, now you have a very clear criteria on how to test for it. So then we go into actual problems and reasons for where are we and why are we here. First and foremost, the air superiority. Ukraine has entered this war with 120 tactical aircraft, out of which only 40 were considered to be technically suitable for utilization, and 33 medium short-range anti-aircraft missile battalions, of which 18 had serviceable equipment. If that is nothing that describes of a pitiful air force, I don't know what does. Again, what Zaluzhny is saying is we achieved miracle levels of performance. We all know that, but again, it's just very nice and heartwarming feeling that we hear that. He does describe that the enemy still continues maintaining the significant air superiority, which complicates the troop advance. I talked about this extensively, that there are both airframes that Russia is using very simply with dropping gliding bombs, and helicopters with over 14 kilometers anti-tank missile systems. All of these air assets and air threats needs to be countered. But most importantly, Zaluzhny states right over here that they cannot dominate the skies, that while they are using their air forces to supplement and prevent Ukraine from achieving their goals on the ground, they are not dominating the air power. They don't have the capabilities, and they are not seemingly able to break those capabilities into dominating air power. So instead, right now, a lot of Russian focus is on unmanned aerial vehicles, drones flying all over the battlefield. Mine breaching. We talked extensively about mines during the summer offensive and how difficult it is. And mine breaching capabilities that Ukraine had were very, very limited. There were packages, like at the start, they were technically just outdated pieces. And since then, while the Western powers have provided certain levels of mine-breaching capabilities, they were not prepared for the density and depth of the minefield of 15 to 20 kilometers whole line intensely mined fields, which is ludicrous amounts of it. If you find a NATO I dare you, I fucking double dare you, for all of the armchair experts that actually are knowing your shit in military aspects, and they are right now saying, "Oh, Ukrainian offensive plan was just best, or just worse, and they didn't have enough planning with NATO standards." I double dare you to find me any kind of NATO-specific articles, NATO training or mine-laying preparation that will talk about non-stop 15 to 20 kilometers intense layered minefields. So let's be very clear whenever there is critique comes, what are we dealing with here? Again, new type of warfare, especially as Zaluzhny is mentioning here, distance mining capabilities are extremely powerful, such as, for example, Zemlyedelye weapons system, which is able to, once the minefields were cleared by either Miklik or any other sources, then this distance mining equipment is just remining those fields again. Counter battery fire. Zaluzhny starts by talking that artillery still executes from 60 to 80% of the total volume of combat tasks. So the load that artillery is carrying in this warfare cannot be underestimated. That's why the continuous supply of artillery equipment, artillery shells is so predominantly crucial to maintain. That's why the grading of the Russian artillery system is again so crucial, because the impact that artillery is having is significant. And here is a stone in my garden, and I now take this as a proper baseline, that despite the statements of some so-called military analysts, again, not an analyst here, just a commenter, but I draw my knowledge from a lot of the other military analysts, so technically if I'm parroting that, it's also my problem. But various publications, including the Russian media, regarding the gradual weakening of Russia, that we have, like the United Armed Forces, still have no right to underestimate the Russian capabilities for artillery, especially because they're trying to improve it. The success of counter battery fire was first and foremost used by Ukraine by using the Excalibur rounds, the 155 artillery Excalibur rounds. However, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the electronic warfare capabilities of Russia. But because of the Russian developments in the electronic warfare capabilities, a lot of these simpler GPS guided bombs and shells are less precise than ideal, which actually forced Ukraine to use the Gimler's missiles just because they have higher impact to destroy Russian artillery, which is unfortunate because that meant that these missiles were not able to execute other tasks. So this kind of gives a new perspective of why when we saw the destruction of the Russian artillery pieces, very often it was by Gimler's rockets. It was actually a response to the Russian jamming equipment. Beyond that, Russians are improving their counter-battery fire by using the loitering munitions such as Lancet, Zala, Orlans, and everything else. So while we were making fun about Russian cheap drones, whenever they're cheap drones, that means that they're made very in a very large quantities and they're available. And Russia is still improving in these areas. So counter battery is going to be a problem for Ukraine going forward. And it is a problem right now. However, despite all of that, despite everything in this, Ukraine is stating that they were able to achieve parity with Russia in artillery field, mostly because they are both degrading the Russian artillery, and while having less barrels and less capabilities in total when you put barrel to barrel, because of the precision, the high precision, and the adaptation by Ukrainian armed forces, they're able to compensate for the lack of barrels. As for creation and preparation of the necessary reserves, this is to people that are saying that Ukraine is running out of people, and Zaluzhny is tackling this problem. That in theory, Russia, just by sheer numbers, have almost 3 times the mobilization potential than of Ukraine. However, later Zaluzhny talks about that while Russia have these capabilities of mobilization, they are limited in how much of these troops they can train. And we talked about this, that some of the units that are reaching the battlefield right now have been mobilized units that were called in back in September last year, and because they were not properly processed and equipped during that time. Beyond that, Russia is having an issue that a lot of the people inside of Russia are not really willing to fight. A lot of people are dodging draft. So while in principle, Russia does have the 3 times on paper number of mobilized people, the will of it is not there. But he also talks about some of the Ukrainian problems. And he talks that Ukraine has an issue of mobilizing Ukrainian civilians, that a lot of that initial wave has been reduced, and they're trying to work through the political restrictions, through the political will. We talked about it in our last video when we talked about Zelensky article and that he doesn't want to mobilize youth. General Zaluzhny is generally stating that our capabilities for training are inadequate, first and foremost because Russia can target all of the training facilities of Ukrainian armed forces. That's why I think it's on the West to help expand these training capabilities and allow Ukraine to build reserves. Long story short, he says that Ukraine can build reserves. It's just not enough to achieve a significant, overwhelming advantage over Russia. And what he does not say is that, oh, Ukraine is running out of manpower. That is not it. He says, not enough facilities, not fast enough. We cannot just match it. Electronic warfare, super important. He goes in depth about the different types of like Silok, Python, Harpoon, different types of electronic warfare, from the strategic level electronic warfare to tactical level, trench level electronic warfare. He says that a lot of these jamming equipments that Russia has introduced are making troubles for a lot of high level, high precision weaponry, especially even the drones and so on. And he says that a lot of these 65% of the jamming stations in Ukraine are produced from Soviet Unions, and there was only 25 new ones at the start of the war. Right now, they have achieved parity with how Ukraine is using electronic warfare with Russia. So it's when I'm saying Russia has introduced a lot of the electronic warfare, what I'm saying is, again, it's more of a parity situation. So in this way, Zaluzhny outlines those 5 areas where there is right now the most battle between Russia and Ukraine. And right now it's on the same level. And he outlines that these 5 areas needs to be improved if Ukraine is to tip the balance from the current positional nature of warfare to get back to the maneuver type of warfare that we all hope and expect to see significant gains by the Ukrainian armed forces. So for all of the people that were saying, oh my God, issue, how do we overcome this? Well, General Zaluzhny here is being so nice to us all that he provides us with a recipe for success. For gaining air superiority, he talks about drone swarms, which is absolutely amazing. So far, a lot of drones have been supplied by the volunteers, and Zaluzhny here is clearly stating that we need drones and we need them in quantities that are not supplied at this moment. That means both US, EU, and everyone else should focus on supplying as many drones as possible for Ukraine. And he says that swarm drone tactics are a must for Ukrainian armed forces. He says that hunting down enemy UAVs with the help of own hunter drones with trap nets on board in order to directly eliminate, destruct the threat of material and personnel on the battlefield is relevant. Use of radiation systems of the medium-range anti-aircraft systems to target illuminated stations, so like anti-radar installations, blinding or thermal image reconnaissance equipment, so to blind the thermal images is really important, and use of electronic warfare all over the battlefield, such as jammers, anti-drone guns, etc., and crucial. So what is he saying? We need to both have more drones, and we need to have these different weapons that will help us combat these 4 areas, such as kamikaze drones. He talks about net captures because it's a simple solution, but I also would want to bring the laser technology that is being developed right now. Potentially that has something. And he talks about that blinding the enemy in different specters of visual range is requirement. For a counter battery fire, he says that building up local GPS fields to improve the operations of precise munitions, so more reliable GPS, increase the share of tasks on counter battle, so to get more teams, especially with drones, to be dedicated counter battery teams. So use counter battery assets in combinations with measure to mislead the enemy. Increase the capability of artillery reconnaissance equipment provided with framework of international material and logistic assistance through the use of non-standard settings. So what he's saying about we need to break and create new type of approaches how we're moving. We need to use both camouflage, the decoys, everything like this, to make sure that the traditional deployments, the expected deployments of weaponry that's been used so far needs to change, because this is how it's being exploited. One of the major things how counter battery is exploited is to study the enemy patterns and adapt to them. For example, if we know that the enemy has an artillery position every 5 kilometers, it very specifically defines in which areas drones need to look for the artillery. Very often artillery will fire from the same position over and over again over the days. So for example, scouting drones can just find the tracks on the ground, fly there every day, and then target the artillery that arrives then. That's how we saw some high-level artillery pieces being destroyed. All in all, Zaluzhny says that these things that needs to be developed and worked on. Mine barriers and breaching, super important. He talks about the lidar technology. Lidar is like when the laser is scanning the ground, so it helps to determine which parts are mined, which parts are not mined, to find maybe less mined fields with drones and so on. He talks about additional smoke protectors to help demine by using smoke equipment to hide presence from the enemy. Then he talks about the other possibility of demining, such as jet engines, decommissioned aircraft, water cannons, or industrial water solutions. So to try maybe to throw, large amounts of water or heavy equipment or old equipment just to put it down in the battlefield to use it as a rolling dummy to explode off the ordnance. Use of the mini tunneling excavators like a rapid burrowing robots that will burrow like huge holes in which explosives then can be filled in and then make an explosions. Instead of having this Miklik vehicle that is driving on a battlefield, it may be just units that are just deploying these burrowing robots. Use of the anti-drone guns to counter the enemy reconnaissance, which is really, really, really great. To anti-drone technology, again, to prevent the demining units to be attacked. There are already here some interesting examples of how the approach to demining could be done. What Zaluzhny is stating that we need a new way of demining. Then he talks for a creation of reserves. He talks about the Oberich Unified State Register for draftees, about the new way of drafting. He talks about attracting more citizens to the military service to get rotation in. So he wants to control of an accounting of training of Ukrainian citizens. He wants to expand the list of categories in Ukraine of citizens to be drafted. We talked about this extensively. Again, very good that they are really making this decision. And he talks about internships as a potential way going forward. Electronic warfare. Again, he's listing systems from Ukraine that are really good and he wants them scaled to be adapted to Ukrainian defense forces. Increase the capabilities of electronic warfare to be adapted from the technology that is made in the West. He wants to organize additional measures to defeat the enemy electronic warfare forces, so special hunter-killer squads, if you mean. Moreover, he underlines that all of this needs to be supplemented by improved command and control, by implementing IT technology. So all of your IT nerds, IT savvy people, this is call for you. More IT developments are needed. And most importantly, he says logistics, accumulation of resources, proper logistical structures is fundamental to go forward. He talks about the partner nations countries that are currently increasing the production capacities. However, he states that it seems that it will take at least 1 year to 2 years for partner nations to scale that capabilities. And he talks extensively about what I have been talking, that Ukraine needs to increase their local production of all of the things mentioned here. To sum up, if you thought that Ukraine and Russia is in a deadlock and there is no way forward, well, General Zaluzhny just said, fuck off. What he explained very, very clearly is that where are we now has been looked at and analyzed in details. There are 5 areas that Ukraine is looking to improve, and General Zaluzhny has even outlined some of the potential solutions. Might not be these solutions precisely, but what we do see is that he has a plan. Such a bright mind that is in charge of Ukrainian armed forces makes me extremely optimistic. Instead of just looking at your own stockpiles, looking at your resources and being like Russia, just throw more manpower. Oh, we cannot breach Ukrainian defensive? defenses, let's just have columns that are longer. Let's just send in more troops. It doesn't matter how many of them dies. What Zaluzhny is demonstrating that their general staff, the people in his command and everyone else are actually looking at the problems on the ground very realistically. They are acknowledging that certain barriers exist that prevent them from breaking this deadlock. We are in a very fabulous state of warfare where Ukraine has acknowledged that they are absolutely preventing Russia from moving. However, Russia also has significant capabilities that prevent Ukraine from moving. And now we have a recipe to follow. We will see if the West will support Ukraine to help Zaluzhny bake this cake of Ukrainian victory. But I will certainly be here, and I will certainly try to do everything in my power to help Ukrainian armed forces do exactly that. Slava Ukraini, guys. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.